Welcome to the series, How America Was Stolen, Episode 7. After the settlers unleashed their revenge, the forests of Virginia fell into a silence that didn't feel natural. Animals moved cautiously, villages moved deeper into the trees, and smoke from burned crops drifted like ghosts over the rivers. But the worst part wasn't the flames, it was the hunger. Because Episode 6 revealed the colonists' new strategy: punish the tribes with starvation, and Episode 7 shows what came next, a siege not just on villages, but on life itself. The Powhatan Confederacy, once strong and abundant, suddenly found themselves fighting a kind of war they had never known. Not a war of warriors, not a war of weapons, but a war of survival. When the English destroyed their fields, the tribes tried to adapt. Hunters moved deeper into the forest to track deer. Gatherers searched new areas for berries, nuts, and medicinal plants. Families rationed what little food they had left. But the settlers had planned far ahead. They blocked the main hunting routes. They patrolled rivers with armed boats, preventing fishing. They burned canoes to keep tribes from crossing to better grounds. Everywhere the native people went, the settlers appeared, armed, aggressive, determined to choke out every source of sustenance. This was not random violence. This was a calculated starvation campaign. What made it worse was the season. Winter was approaching, the time when food was already scarce, even in peaceful years. And now, the war's damage made cold months feel like years. The colonists believed hunger would collapse native resistance. But what they didn't expect was that the tribes still had one weapon left: unity. Instead of scattering, the tribes began to share resources across their network. Villages took in refugees from burned settlements. Hunters from one tribe brought meat to another. Elders passed down forgotten survival techniques, like how to dry fish with no salt, how to make broth from tree bark, how to build winter shelters with minimal tools. But still, the pressure grew. Children cried from pain, elders weakened. Warriors, who once moved with strength, now fought exhaustion with every step. Each sunrise carried the same question: can we keep going? And while the native people battled starvation, the settlers faced their own crisis. The English colonies were struggling. Many settlers were starving too, because they had never mastered farming in the New World. Their crops failed, their livestock died. Their supplies from England came late, or not at all. Many colonists survived only by stealing from the tribes they were attacking, and so they doubled down on their siege. The colonists raided native food stores not just for strategy, but because they needed the food themselves. They grew dependent on the destruction they created. Their survival was now directly tied to the suffering of others. This twisted dependency drove the settlers to even harsher extremes. Entire villages were burned not for rebellion, but simply for food. People were killed not for warfare, but for corn. The settlers' fear turned into cruelty, and their cruelty turned into policy. But while the settlers grew more desperate, the native people grew more determined. Powhatan warriors began organizing nighttime raids on colonial outposts, not to kill, but to steal back food. They hit supply routes, broke into colonial storehouses, and carried corn home through the darkness. These raids kept villages alive, even though they risked brutal retaliation. And through all of this, a new idea began to form in the mind of the Powhatan leadership. The English were not seasonal visitors. They were not temporary settlers. They were not even struggling newcomers anymore. They were becoming an occupation force. And if the native nations did not act soon, if they did not counter this siege with force, the settlers' starvation strategy would eventually become something worse: extinction. So as winter passed and spring returned, the tribes came to a decision. If the settlers insisted on a war of starvation, then the native nations would fight a war of resistance. A unified one, a strategic one, a coordinated one, and that decision, that spark, would lead directly to the greatest coordinated native counterattack the colonies had ever seen. The settlers thought they were breaking the Powhatan, but they were awakening something far more powerful: